All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's discussion on the transformative potential of AI technologies in healthcare. Seems to be the hot topic of the event. And as advancements, specifically in sensors and AI intelligence converge, we are seeing a wave of innovation that promises to revolutionize patient care from real-time monitoring and diagnostics to personalized treatments and more efficient healthcare delivery. Today, we are fortunate to have three key stakeholders who are experts with us, representing the perspective of a leading medtech company at the forefront of developing these technologies, a venture firm and a strategic investor whose investment expertise is helpful in shaping the future of this rapidly evolving space. So we'll explore how the clinical applications of AI-based devices are driving value creation in healthcare, the opportunities and challenges faced in scaling these innovations, and the impact they are having on both patients and the broader healthcare ecosystem. So let's dive into the conversation by understanding how each of the panelists views the potential of AI to reshape healthcare. I'm going to first let each of the panelists introduce themselves. Tal, would you go first, please?
Sure. Thanks, Tonya. Hey, everyone. Tal Wenderow. I'm a venture partner in Genesis MedTech, which is a medical device strategic company out of Asia, and before that, operator for most of my life in robotic digital health companies.
Hey, everyone. My name is Noam. I'm an MD by training. I have my background. I started in the military as a physician, turned into MedTech 15 years ago. In Abiomed, I'm leading all the product development, everything that is bread and butter about pumps and heart recovery. And on top of that, we also have a specific focus on a new generation of sensor-based and AI, especially gearing towards the ICU, which I think is very relevant for today.
Thom?
Yeah, my name is Thom Rasche. I'm partner with Earlybird. Some of you may know me because I introduced myself before, and I used to work for J&J. In the sensor-based business for 16 years before I stumbled into the venture world. I'm now doing venture for 20 years, mostly focusing on medtech, at least me, even though our fund is completely healthcare focused, i.e. going from biotech to diagnostics and medical devices. So,
Great, thank you, gentlemen. Great perspectives here. So AI is the hot buzzword. It's the hot buzzword. It's got all the hype right now. Everybody kind of throws that term AI around. But it's been around for a long time.
I have it on my title, by the way.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's been around for a long time. Why now, and why in healthcare? Go ahead.
Go ahead, okay. So I think we're seeing some kind of a similar dynamic that's happening in medtech, as we have seen in the buzz in the world of the high tech with NVIDIA. It doesn't come on its own. There's a set of things that have to happen, and it's the data capture, the ability to get a lot of data at a very fast pace, and then there's the ability to process and host those data at a very large quantities and speed. And then you need to start building insights. So that's the hot topic of the AI and the insights from that. So you can go back in time to this evolution all the way from beginning of Facebook, which in a way it was a sensor. Everyone just putting in their own information. Right. It was a great sensor. And then we've got all the cloud base and the housing of all those data. And now the ability to process it is everything is skyrocketing. We have a similar thing in medtech, because now we have sensors that are mostly digitized, much less analog. Obviously, the processing power from the high tech is coming into that. Everything is going on the cloud. All of our pumps are now housed in the cloud. All the information is housed in the cloud. So now it's really coming to the exciting part of putting it all together. So now you're seeing it. The thing in here, it's not about hype, it's about clinical outcomes. So that's the next challenge. Like, how does it help patient? Right. It's the next challenge, really, for medtech.
Right. I remember the days of MySpace, so I'm going to date myself there. I'm on Facebook.
but I think on top of that, healthcare is a regulated environment, so it takes time. And to Noam's points, we got to that critical point that there is enough data, enough conviction and enough smart people coming from other industry that are actually not trying to do the healthcare. Let's try in other industry, meaning I think some hospitals still work with fax even these days, right? I don't know when's the last time I sent a fax to anyone, but so the time is right now because healthcare is a slow follower, especially on the technology adoption.
Thom, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think why now is an interesting question because I think one, the devices are now at a stage where they actually transmit, which they haven't done for a long time. And to me, it's out of the question that the granularity you can get with an AI analysis, it will lead to better outcomes, at least to better information, let's put it this way, in the sense that a physician would never be able to detect when you take it at a very low level in like image recognition in radiology or anything like this. I think to me it's clear that a computer can do this much better than a human being. I think there is no question about it. What me or I as a venture capital investor always question is whether that is actually a self-standing business. I.e., is that truly a service business you can run on your own in parallel to the devices or the drugs or in terms of the providers, or is that actually an integral part of either a radiology company or a medtech company or anything like this where you say this is a service I will have to provide as an analytical service. Now you can argue that, let's take Abiomed as a good example, they are covering a certain segment of the treatment path, naturally so, but what about all of the other, the infusion pumps, the drugs, the clinical information and all of that, and how do you get all that together and who's going to do this? This is Abiomed, very unlikely. Why? So who's going to do this and who's going to pay for that?
Who's going to pay for it exactly? We'll get to that topic in a minute. But that's a great segue into, Noam, can you explain what specifically Abiomed is doing in this space and why it's so unique? And I know you brought toys with you, so.
I brought toys.
You brought toys. Good.
Well, I learned very quickly that you always sell, right?
How much?
So,
Always be selling, right?
always be selling.
I don't have cash.
So let me just a quick, so what do we do? So this is the Impella. It's the Impella heart pump. It gets implanted, it goes into the heart. This part sits in the left ventricle, and the other part, this would be the aortic valve, and this would sit in the aorta. It's very simple conceptually. There's a cannula, there's a pump here that pulls blood from the ventricle, and it does it in a physiological way. So it doesn't bypass the heart, the blood will flow in a physiological way. So that's been our journey, and that's getting to a $1.5 billion business as of coming out of 2024. And always the challenge that we had was about making it smaller, more flow, more durable, more blood compatible. Those things, those would capture about 90% of all of our product development. But we've broken a ceiling because now this pump, for example, can sit in patients for months. Patients can get out of bed, patients can go to the restroom, they can walk around the hospital with this type of cardiac support, which is like walking with a crutch for someone who has a muscle injury. But now the next challenge is like, what do we do with this all information? So more time on the pump is a lot of variability in care. Nursing staff and physician and residents and fellows and all that. Our approach to that, to your point, is that we want to standardize that care because that will determine the outcome of the patients. How do we standardize the care? We can't train everyone because that's literally boiling the ocean. Our approach would be through data. So we want to start using that pump as real estate. We want to start putting more and more sensors on the pump. And that gets me to what I started with, which is that we have more sensors. We need a place to receive the sensors. We need a place to integrate the data, to show the data, and then get insights from the data. So that's, in a nutshell, that's our vision to doing that. We are not a software company.
Yeah.
We know how to do coils and motors. We would love to partner with those companies that don't have the real estate in the ICU, so we can partner around that, create that umbrella of patient care in the ICU.
Where do you see the data going, and who is it being used by?
Should I take this?
You're on a roll, go for it.
I'll keep going. Well, perfect. We'll always have to start with the bedside. That's our view. It's an easily be challenged, but in my view, and that's the conviction we have at Abiomed as well, with our Impella Connect, which is on the cloud, it comes down to the bedside. The bedside has to run the management of the patient. So the first information has to come there. You can have a reflection of that information on the cloud, and you can use the cloud sometimes for computing or storage, but it has to be bedside. And there's enough to solve at the bedside with all the variability of care and different providers that there's room for a lot of innovation.
So question about it. I assume we send anonymized data to the cloud, right? And you use it for your own purposes. Did you encounter a hospital that will tell you, data is mine, you cannot touch it for your processing? Or they're more open right now to do whatever you want as long as it's anonymized?
In the US, it varies a lot. So there's probably as many opinions or more than the number of hospitals, or more so the number of chief information officers or IT personnel. Also post-COVID, the IT personnel in hospitals are drained. Like there's no one there. So you're trying to find people to talk to and they're overwhelmed, they're doing the mundane things. I think that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for companies to come and take this over, make it very easy and streamlined to put it in. Specifically to your question, we started our Impella Connect, which is our cloud infrastructure, to seeing where all the pumps are running, and we have it for the entire US now. We have 1,500 hospitals with the pump data streaming online. We started this in COVID. So that's one of those examples where COVID had some degree of blessing to facilitate and accelerate certain things. We went into COVID with 50 accounts online. We came out of COVID with 1,000 accounts online.
Wow.
And it was mostly because the hospital needed the help. And they said, let's get through this because we want your people bedside to help the implants. I think now hospitals are starting to pull back from being so permissive with certain things and being more risk tolerant. So now you have to get into the rigor of BAAs and being part of that, or have partners to do the BAA for you.
What about outside of the acute care setting? So, you know, with the watches and the other sensor types of technologies that we might be wearing or using in the home.
Yeah.
Where do you see that data being useful?
I'm with Thom.
I'll let you guys know. I don't know
we
much
can help
about
you a little bit. You want some water? But we can help you. But, I'm with Thom. It's all about, it's not about who uses the data, it's what do you do with the data, and is it a standalone? As an example, I ran a vocal biomarker company, and I came to the realization there's a lot of startups that doing things in a silo, and it's not good enough to move the needle, whether it's outcome, cost, or patient care, and you kind of need to combine them. But startup cannot do that. They cannot start 3 companies together, meaning or it happens with the big tower that everyone is connected. I think Noam is trying to do the same with Impella, but the Apple Watch, I think it's a great tool. It will take time. And the question is, what do you do with that? And the FDA, for example, view, if you send me some information, that's a risk, because what happened if you missed? And there's information that you actually missed. So there's a lot of risk, and then who do you send it to? The patient, the physician, how fast the physician? I think we're not there yet. We're not even close to being there.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest questions. I think if your Apple Watch is detecting an AFib in the middle of the night, is Apple going to call the physician? And by the way, talking is like there's liability issues involved with that. So are they saying it's like you call 911 to actually get an ambulance sent out or stuff like that? So how the hell are you going to solve that? Now, that should hopefully not prevent us from collecting the data, but I think the whole data integration part is actually really a catch-22. I really don't have an answer to this, but if you look at it, I mean, as much as I understand any company, be it Abiomed or anybody else, to say I'm interested in my analytics or for my pump in order to get better treatment for the patient or better adjustment for my device, I think this is perfectly fine and understood. But that's only like such a small piece, because monitoring comes to that, infusion pumps comes to this, whole diagnostics, the labs, am I shredding the blood, yes or no? So there's so much information which actually is currently available. It's already put in a format which is standardized, so that was one of the problems we have faced, but I think that's now solved. But who is going to integrate all of that? Is it the hospital information services companies? Is it Apple? Google? I don't know. Who is it? So who brings all of that wealth of information, really wealth of information? It's very positive. who gets this all together, and if they do so, somebody's got to pay for it.
Right.
So I think somebody's got to put money on the table and say this information or this additional information, one, is helping the patient, which that's my assumption, but secondly, is actually driving costs down or doing whatever you can, imagine as an outcome measure to actually say this is where it's going. And I don't have an answer to this. I would love to have one, but I think that's the crux in the system. We have various systems in ICUs and or even low-key with Apple, which are running and catching and fetching data, which in a conglomerate may make all the sense in the world. How?
Yeah, well, those are great points. What about the business model and the reimbursement? Who's going to pay for it? Maybe, Noam, you can speak to what is the business model for your sensor technology currently?
So we are fortunate / spoiled in a way because in our business, it's sickest patients in the hospital. So 1 in 2 patients that get our pump is statistically, they die. So we know our outcome very quickly. And what we've learned over the years is that better outcomes drive better business. And it seems very trivial, but we see this very timely. So we have the ability to step into a hospital, look through their patients from the last 10 months or 12 months. We actually do this regularly, and we do our outcome review, focusing on the clinical and trying to understand what the variants were and where the variability came in. So we have an incentive of keep on doing this, and we have a large margin of improvement still. I mean, we're moving the needle. We just had an RCT that was published. We showed 12% improvement in absolute terms, but it's still 60% of patients that are surviving and 40% that don't. So there's a lot of room to improve that. So we have the incentive, and we know that it drives business. So our economic for us is one that is mostly internally faced. We don't necessarily need to move prices in order to justify this because we know that it moves the business. I think a lot of the things for smaller companies will be to find us or some others us that have this thing, and we're missing that expertise. So we will partner to be able to do that.
Right. Right.
But that's also the challenge, to your point, of startups, right? They cannot just wait for the strategic to come and partner, and you can do 1, 2, 4 deals a year if you're really aggressive.
Yeah.
There's hundreds of startups out there, and startups, you have the luxury, I think, in my opinion, not just that, but you started with the therapy, highly reimbursed, and then you add the sensors and the AI, which is a much easier path. If you're only a software-based company, that's exactly the challenge. How do you show and you do what I call death by pilot, when you go to all these payers and they'll say, all right, let's do it 3 months. You're all excited. You come to the board. Amazing. United wants to work with me. And that 3 months is 6 months. And the results are not inclusive, right? It's not black and white because it's never black and white. So unfortunately, we don't have the recipe or the answer. Otherwise, we'll be doing it right now.
Right.
But
well, I think, Thom, you had mentioned the key with partnerships, right? So medtech or AI partnering with pharma companies to, have more precision medicine. Can you speak to that a little bit more and the business model for that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think if we collect enough data, be it on the intensive care unit or even in any hospital, you will be able to determine, for instance, any of those new antibody therapies which are looking at AI models to determine which patients will react to a therapy. You can do this in pathology labs where you actually do now AI analysis of the slides in order to for pharma research to help understand what drugs react to what patient population so that you can segregate patients much better. So all of that, I think, is actually very feasible. And of course, pharma has a high interest to, you could argue you limit your market, but on the other hand, you will say that those where the therapy is actually active, and those antibody therapies are extremely expensive. They go $300,000 to $500,000 in a year. To say, well, you can go to the payer and say, at least we know it works at this patient population and not at that patient population. So those are, for me, kind of like the initial steps to segregate patient populations. And there it's actually rather simple because, it's not simple, but at least you have a target. So it's not all data together. When we talk about the whole hospital process and how do you gather the data there and actually make it meaningful for outcome, then I wonder, and I have no idea, how do you define a stepwise approach to get to a ultimately like the whole thing? But I mean, how do you go? I mean, any company will do something. Braun, I know, is doing something on the perfusion machines, and I know Siemens and GE or Philips are doing something on the monitoring, which is great, but there is a piece missing, and I don't know what the step approach would be.
Yeah. What about, just shifting gears a little bit, what about the patient privacy from all of the data going around everywhere, and we're not sure as a patient, right, where it's going? Can you speak to that a little bit and the challenges there?
Meaning, first, is obviously individually. I'm not concerned about that. My wife, I remember, used to work for early sense, that's the patient monitoring underneath the bed and put it under our bed at our house, which was, so who's listening to that? Yes. But I'm personally not concerned about that. I think obviously the regulators are concerned, and you kind of raise a bigger question than that: who owns the data? Is it the patient? Is it the hospital? Is it the companies? And that's a huge one. Meaning officially it's the patient, but the hospital owns all this data. I think you have to trust the companies that are doing a good job protecting the data, right? No one asked Abiomed, is the data secure? It's obvious. And I think we as a community of startups and strategic have to do a good job in protecting the data and not do shortcuts, because one loss of trust or a breach, it's, it can be not only deadly for the patient, but also for the brand going forward.
Dowd, without allowed.
And I would second Tal in terms of on the personal aspect, especially if each one of us relates to their own therapeutic area. So when I think about patient privacy, I'm thinking of God forbid, myself in an ICU, and said, I don't care about my privacy. I need to get stuff done at this point. However, it is something to think about in a broader sense, both because it's not everyone is in the ICU, and there are data that are private and then can be used in a malicious way. The other part is also maybe hand in hand. The regulator is coming in much stronger on cybersecurity on every level. And we're finding that there's a new regulation that came out last March, and it's not only elevating the level, it sends a direction, which then your risk-averse colleagues can easily overly interpret that. So it creates a higher level of scrutiny even within the organization, because you say, well, I'm going to do only this, but a year from now something else would come. We have to actually plan for that. And that starts delaying things. And I'm sure for smaller companies, it delays their timeline, raises their cash needs, and all those things.
Yeah. Thom, do you have any thoughts?
No, I think I would second that. I think only the healthy worry about data security.
Yeah.
So once you're sick, I think this is the last thing on your list you worry about. And I always make, and I think we talked about this, the comparison to banking. We do electronic banking, I don't know, for what, 30 years or something like this? And is anybody worried about the data security of my banking system? I think everybody uses this. Everybody that uses on the app and everything. And with banking, i.e. with money, you can do something immediately. With your health data, that's definitely not a direct connection. In order to make something with it, i.e. financially or something like this is actually not that easy, at least not that straightforward. So I would actually be much less worried about the data misuse and all of that compared to my financial data, which that I would like to be protected, actually.
Good point. So from a regulatory perspective, the FDA just came out with a kind of a joint statement with 4 different centers from the FDA in terms of what they promise to do regulating AI technologies, how they're going to put more scrutiny around this from the concept all the way through utilization. What are your thoughts on this? And is there too much regulation now? Not enough? Where does it need to go?
You want me to start?
Go ahead.
I don't think there's too much regulation. I do agree with what Noam mentioned, that each one read the regulation differently. And startup read it like here, big companies are there, and there's some place in the middle. And I really believe that when I interview a quality guy, a regulatory guy, is they need to provide the boundary lines, right? You cannot do this and this. In between, there's a lot of gray zone, and you need to be comfortable and honest to yourself that you're doing the right thing for the industry, for the patients, for your product. I don't want too much regulation, but I do think there need to be some guardrail from a risk analysis and all that, that you actually walk through them, but not overly, because it changes, as mentioned, every day.
Yeah, it's evolving.
I don't know actually if there's too much, because it's relatively new, and it's like with the law system. Until there's a ruling by a judge, you don't really know where the limit is. So we're testing it, and it's hard, because many times when you test, you want to test to see if you succeed. So you put out a device, or you put a submission, and it goes through. You actually don't know what the limit is, because if the boundary was here, and you gave yourself so much room, then you succeeded, but maybe you had some more flexibility that you didn't allow yourself. But companies are afraid of getting no from FDA. So I think it's not until we get a few no's from FDA and then negotiate, then we'll know exactly what the boundary are. So I'm at the position now with the new guidance is that I'm actually concerned with over-interpretation than over-regulation at this particular point in time.
Yeah, and the AI technology that's been cleared to date has been through the 510K predicate process. Do you think that process needs to change and be specific to AI technologies, because they're kind of, applying an old process to new innovation?
Yeah. Look, I live in a PMA world, and it's a nightmare. It's the right thing for patients.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
I hope they find a way that is not PMA for
PMA-like.
AI. PMA-like, because the PMA is not just the burden of proof that you have, it's also the systems that you need to have behind it to sustain it. And if you apply this to software, then you miss the whole edge of software, which is agile and quick and quick learning and the ability to adapt quickly. So I would love the regulator to be able to adapt to that versus force AI into a PMA universe, which I think will be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Meaning, I think the FDA is the most concerned is software that actually adapt and learn on the fly. That's what they're really concerned about. Because if you do design freeze, this is the version that goes out, they're typically okay with that. If you start saying, my AI engine, we're going to learn from your patient, and I would change the Impella product on the fly based on that, they're not comfortable. And I don't know how to solve for that right now. And I think that's a big for AI, the self-learning and iterating without human interruption. That's, to me, the biggest challenge that the regulator needs to solve.
Yeah, I think iterations, it's really difficult to define what I would call the borderline, i.e., how big can an iteration be before it is at least perceived, or even after the fact, mostly, know it actually had an impact on patient treatment. And so this is the hard piece to actually say, okay, how much do you allow software as a service to actually get iterated without maybe just with a notification to the regulators or something like this. So this is the most difficult thing. And by the way, don't forget, this is all global all of a sudden. This is not FDA based anymore, because any company would love and mostly actually have global products rather than one specifically designed for, let's say, the FDA as a regulator. And I mean, it's a good example, because at the end of the day, you would like to actually have tech companies and medtech companies as innovators act in the market initially fairly freely. But when you look at social media and stuff like that, you can say maybe, well, that was a little bit too freely. Nobody knew. I mean, only after the fact. But so it's really, it's a very difficult answer to give. And here we talk about people's lives, potentially at least. So where that boundary is and where a software can be iterated with a notification versus where you need to go through a potentially amended approval process, hard to say, really, because you only know after the fact. You really don't know preemptive.
Well, on that note, from an investment standpoint, what key performance indicators are you looking for in these technologies before you invest or consider investing?
So, I mean, I can answer this very easily. I mean, it's outcome, outcome, outcome. Show me. I mean, most of the AI analytics we see, and I mean, we have a lot of business plan. I mean, actually, I think it seems to be fashion. If you don't have AI on your business plan written, nobody's going to look at it, which is not right. But right now, that's kind of like the impression I have. But the question I have is always the so what question. Yeah. So you do all of this data analytics, you do all of the analysis, you have coming by, and I have Charité data together with the LMU, and then the next one comes by and said, I have the Mayo data, and mine is better than yours. So protection, uniqueness, outcome, those are the things which I would actually look at to say, like, let me understand why an Abiomed at some point in time would want to acquire you, and why you believe you are unique enough that they say, this is a cool technology, we really need this, or want this, and it helps people. And I think that's kind of like the measure we would always apply, which is, I know, frustrating for most of the tech companies, because the tech companies say, we can't really protect our algorithms. Yeah. I get that. When that goes back then to my initial comment to say, maybe it's not a self-standing business, which I can't give you an answer on this.
Meaning, to add to that, when I look at things like that, the standard of care in healthcare is very low. As Noam mentioned, there's a lot to improvement. So you see a lot of AI companies saying, I'm better than the standard of care. But when you look into that, the bar is much higher for AI. So if the standard of care is 60% and you come with 75, is it good enough, right? Does it move the needle? And so that's one thing. The second thing is, I'm not a data engineer or study any CS, but it's the strength of the algorithm. Because you can find a point in the use case that you have high accuracy and high specificity. I always ask, especially AI company, what's your AUC? And see what's the strength of the algorithm, and that's built on data, and how do they train the data, and is it applicable? And we discussed global. I want to ask Noam, is it the same in US, Germany, Israel, and China? Is it the same algorithm? Do you need to adapt it, or is it globally applicable to all?
Yeah, I agree with that. Let me go back to from an investment. I'll say for us as a strategic, and now I'm becoming much more comfortable with the J&J environment. There's two avenues for investment. I think one is the traditional, which I think the same way that you guys are looking at it, and the other one is, we call it, there's a build to buy, which I think there's a Davide Wortman from Ultracyte. I think that's public information now, that they have a build to buy with Abiomed, and this is an opportunity for them to come and solve something very specific that we need. And there's a lot of things that are pre-negotiated. There's de-risking from our end, which comes mostly as non-dilutive, to get like an NRE, so to get the engineering and the R&D going, and they need to meet specific milestones, and it comes with a commitment for long-term commercial agreement. It can take different forms. So that's our investment, and they have a heavy AI component. So for us, if they come and they solve a specific problem to us, obviously it links to patient care and outcomes eventually, but we can reduce it to something that is much more defined. So if they come and they solve that, this is attractive for us. I think on the other part, in terms of improving outcomes, it is a challenge. It is a challenge, but I would come back to the fundamental. Just like with devices, you don't want a device that's looking for a problem to solve.
Right.
You have to find the clinical problem, or whatever problem it is. It may be an adverse event, or maybe is an efficiency, or standardize, that you're able to quantify and solve.
Yeah.
So marry the two, the problem and the solution. And I see a lot that are enamored by the AI, and definitely when I talk about AI, the hand starts waving, and there's a lot of things like, but eventually you have to marry the problem with the solution, AI or not.
Yeah, and it's like with any technology, it's what is the unmet need, right? And I think, Tal, you talked about specificity and sensitivity in terms of, does it work? But what about clinical utility data to show that it's actually making a difference in patient care and changing decisions, right, of the provider of how they care for that patient?
Of course, and so far I think we're focused on this discussion more into the in-hospital, right, to help surgical procedures and others. There's a big area of hospital at home, skilled nurse facility, the bar is lower because they have staff there. But I agree, meaning it's all, like everyone mentioned, there's a lot of amazing technologies. Meaning, I'm a startup guy by heart, so I see that, it's like, wow, unbelievable, without saying any bad words here. I go back home and I was like, that doesn't make sense. How do you adapt that? What's happened there? So without being too generalized, it's all about the outcomes, like Thom mentioned.
And the outcomes being proven in what way?
I mean, the easiest one,
randomized RCT.
The easiest one is clinical benefit. That's the easiest one. There's a lot of companies trying to solve cost, and I think on paper it sounds really good. The problem with solving cost is demonstrating that when you're that small of the therapy solution. It's really hard when you come, okay, I can reduce readmission by 20%.
Yeah. But there will always be somebody who can do it cheaper. So cost is usually, most of the times, not really an argument to introduce a new technology because unless it really dramatically changes the process, I mean, and you're talking about cost savings in the 30, 40, 50% range rather than 10 or 5, something like this. I think at the end of the day, it's mostly about clinical outcome. It's all about, show me, patient outcome. Does it improve the outcome and what is the measure? Side effects, we may change site of care or anything. What is the measure you would like to show and how big is the trial you need to perform in order to show that, which is basically the question we ask all the time, be it in drugs or in medtech.
Do you think that, can you speak to the trust factor from the physician side and perspective? Do you think their majority are there in terms of trusting AI to augment their decisions? I dare I say replace their decisions, but augment. So
I'll jump into that. AI was disserviced several years ago at the outset of that. A lot of promise. And there, I don't know if people are familiar, there was a sepsis algorithm that came up by Epic, and there was a few that came up with the hype, and also to Tal's point, they assumed it's okay for everyone. It applies to everyone, but it actually applies to the population that you trained it on. So it's as good as the people that you trained on it. And people in South America are different than people in the US, and they're different than those who are European. And when you go to Japan, we need to do sizing because the population as a whole is smaller than the population in the US. So we need to show and we need to give guidance about that specifically. So there's a little bit of a reckoning in that. And the other part from the physician standpoint, they're overwhelmed with notification. They open up Epic and then click, 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 click. Okay, now I can start working, which is dismiss, 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 dismiss. So you're up against that. It's not a naive space anymore. It's something that you work against an exhaustion of alarm and alerts.
But then actually, I think that comes down to the user interface. I completely agree. Most of them is either deleted or dismissed. I think it's kind of like introducing the electronic calculator, where you say you still need to use your brain when you actually do what you do, rather than just trusting the system. So I think at the end of the day, I see any tools, and I call them tools, as support tools, but that is not to say that you should be shutting off your brain. So I think that's, you still have to do like a check the boxes, kind of like, does that make sense or not? And I think that's the key thing here, which I think any software tool will provide. So I'm not really scared. I think it's actually, if it's utilized right, it should be supportive.
So we're out of time. I can't believe this. I could sit here and talk all day with you, gentlemen. Parting thoughts on the opportunities that AI brings to healthcare delivery. Tal, you want to go first?
So first, I just noticed that we did not even mention ChatGPT on this panel, which is really impressive.
Well, I've used it today at least a few times, but
I will say,
we just did.
That's the point. But I will say it's very easy to sit here and say what are the challenges and how hard it is. In the end of the day, it will come. So for all the innovators, for all the startups, for all the companies, just find that really where you feel comfortable that it helps, work with the clinician and make it happen. And then with the strategic or without, or with the investor or without, just make it happen and it will come. It's just a matter of the transition from manual shift to automatic shift, from BlackBerry to iPhone. It's not an if, it's a when.
I will just second that.
Yeah.
We call the environment, and going back to the ICU, but I think it applies to everywhere. We live in a data-rich, we call it DRIP, which is also relevant for the ICU. It's a data-rich, insight-poor environment. And you can apply this to any system. And the computing power is just so much, much better than what we can do in our own head, which allows you to do the classic elements of disruption, right? You can reduce the level of training needed to do certain tasks and certain things if you have a good enough supporting system. I think this is the future, but I'll just echo Tal, you have to know what you're solving.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity for patients. I am 100% convinced. And any startup, I can only recommend find the boundaries on where you can operate in. Because I think the biggest problem is if you try to, you can solve it all, and that ain't gonna work. So you have to define the boundaries in which you operate in and what problem you can actually address and solve. But there's a great opportunity. I'm 100% convinced.
Yep. Tal, Noam, Thom, thank you so much for your time today. Excellent conversation. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you. Thank you.